In a world full of products to choose from, advertisements are made to help you potentially make these choices easier. These advertisements can range from commercials, online ads, radio ads, and even billboards. We didn't always have this variety of ads though, as the way ads are made and used has evolved over time. From early 1700 newspaper ads to now social media advertising, the growth of ads has been quite remarkable, and the technique in which they use has grown as well. Today we'll be analyzing two different specimens that involve advertisements, which are Apple's 1984 Super Bowl ad and Sony's 2005 PSP ad campaign.
Before we do that though, I think it's important that we discuss what makes an advertisement effective. Well, the main goal almost every company has when making an ad is to increase their sales and in return to make more money. To do this, there are a few steps in between, such as actually promoting the product and persuading the audience to buy said product, using various techniques including visual design. Although the way in which companies use visual design to promote and persuade differs, every company strives to gain more profit through the ad, with Sony and Apple being no different.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the Information Purification Directives. We have created, for the first time in all history, a garden of pure ideology, where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests of being contradictory thoughts. Our unification of thoughts is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
To give a little context behind this ad, it was premiered during the 1984 Super Bowl with the estimated 77 million live viewers watching. The ad is inspired by George Orwell's book 1984, which was very popular at the time, and promised viewers that by owning a Macintosh computer, the year 1984 won't end up like the book 1984. If you never read the book, the premise of it is about the government, aka Big Brother, having total control over this fictional dystopian society through manipulation and propaganda. Remember, this premiered during the time where home computers were barely starting to become common, and Apple itself wasn't nearly as big as a company compared to them today. This led to conflicting thoughts on the ad, with many people questioning the entire thought process behind it. Even executives at Apple didn't approve of it and felt it was a horrible ad to be aired during the Super Bowl. In fact, this ad wasn't supposed to be released at all, since the executives tried pulling it from airing, but it was too late. Despite this, today the ad is regarded as Apple's best advertisement and one of the most influential ads in television history. With that in mind, let's discuss what Apple did that makes this ad so important. First off, it was very unique in the way that it almost didn't feel like an ad, since the actual product being advertised isn't shown at all. Instead, the ad uses more of a storytelling approach. I think this was definitely intentional, since the director Apple hired for this ad just so happens to be Ridley Scott, the same Ridley Scott who made major films such as Alien and Blade Runner prior to this ad.
I've always regarded commercials, in the entire time I've been doing commercials, I've always thought of them, because I didn't come from advertising. I came from BBC. So I've always come into commercial advertising and looked at each commercial as a film, right? As a little filmlet, always have done, and I always will do, I guess. Okay, too late to change now. But I looked at it from a point of view, the first idea was dealing with the look of the thing. And instead of doing a contemporary, absolutely contemporary idea of future, I thought it was more interesting to look back at, I think it was done in the 40s, Alexander Korda's Shape of Things to Come, right? I thought that, to me, if you take those interiors, which are slightly decadent looking, even though with all their gloss and all their kind of, what was then marvelous architecture and now looks archaic as architecture, I thought that was an interesting look.
With the director being an accredited filmmaker, it's evident that the concept and vision he had for this ad would differ from a director who only makes commercials, for example. Scott also mentions taking inspiration from Alexander Korda's production of Things to Come when coming up with how this dystopian future might look. With the dark oppressive atmosphere and lifeless environment inspired by 1984, the ad establishes unease and fear for the audience, which creates a sense of pathos or emotional appeal as they watch this group of men become brainwashed by Big Brother, who a lot of people thought was supposed to represent IBM, the biggest tech monopoly at the time. Shortly after, the hero of this ad, who symbolically represents Apple, is revealed running from authorities while sporting a rather vibrant attire, which creates a contrast between her and those of the society. From the beginning up until the hammer is thrown, suspense is being created as you watch this woman breaking from society and liberating this crowd of men from conformity. Once the hammer breaks the screen, it's almost as if the crowd of people become enlightened, as they are flashed by a bright light with facial expressions of awe. Finally, the text pops up and reveals that owning a Macintosh will prevent a society such as this, which is an indirect use of a fear appeal. Now, you may be asking, who are they trying to instill fear into? Well, primarily the target audience, which was the average consumer such as you and I. With the original Macintosh being priced at nearly $2,500, over $7,000 in today's money, this computer was not cheap by any means. Despite this, Apple, rather than promoting this product specifically to tech enthusiasts and corporations, decided to advertise it to viewers of the Super Bowl, one of the most televised events across America. This was a big risk to take, as many viewers of the Super Bowl had never even owned a computer, yet Apple decided to take this risk and maximize the exposure of Macintosh in America. If they had not done this, who knows? It may be very possible that the Macintosh would have never gained success and sold 70,000 units that year thanks to this ad airing during the Super Bowl.
When it comes to the 2005 PSP ad by Sony, this is a whole other discussion involving advertising. To quickly brief, Sony is a multinational conglomerate corporation. In other words, a company that owns other companies. One of the companies that they own is Sony Interactive Entertainment, which mainly focuses on video game products. This company then created a brand called PlayStation, which today is known for its line of consoles. What we will be talking about today is how Sony marketed one of these consoles called the PSP, which is short for PlayStation Portable. As seen here, the way in which Sony advertised these new consoles was by placing graffiti-style artworks throughout urban areas in various states including New York, California, and Pennsylvania. Graffiti itself is a 2D art style often used to visually express emotions and is typically done so using spray paint or markers. The earliest form of graffitis can be dated all the way back to prehistoric times with cave drawings, but today we often see it on buildings and signage. Within the US, graffiti has a long history with rebellious youth and even gangs, which is interesting as we are now looking at how a corporate company has used it. Although this wasn't the first or last time a company has used graffiti as a form of marketing, the way in which Sony did so caught a lot of controversy from the public. One of the biggest problems people had, specifically those involved in graffiti culture, was that Sony, a corporate company, was using and profiting off a culture that wasn't theirs. Many claimed the artwork wasn't authentic graffiti and that they were just doing it to exploit the graffiti scene. Because of this, it can be argued that Sony had a poor judgment of ethics when designing this ad, since they didn't consider how actual graffiti artists would feel. There was also a question of legality and whether Sony had gotten permission from the city to do this, or if it was straight up vandalism. Sony later claimed that they got proper permission for some of the artworks, though it is still unclear if they'd done so for all of them. It is also important to point out how there aren't any indicators that would tell you this was a Sony product besides the actual console being depicted in the artwork. This is called stealth marketing, which can be used as a subtle way to gain a buzz over a product without over-promoting it. Now, you may be asking, why did Sony decide to use graffiti to market their product? They could have done so 1,000 other ways. Well, first off, let's think about their target audience, aka the viewer, and how graffiti might appeal to them. As we know, anyone can play video games, but for young people particularly, video games are super prevalent. Graffiti is similar in a way more often than not. Graffiti is committed by rebellious teens in urban areas. With that being said, we can infer that Sony tried to appeal to the culture of the young urban people and their age for rebellion. It may also be very possible that Sony went for this type of marketing because they knew it would lead to controversy.
So now that we've gone into depth with both of these specimens, let's discuss in what ways they compare and contrast. For starters, the structures of these ads differ, with Apple's being 4-dimensional and Sony's being 2-dimensional. Since Apple's ad was 4-dimensional, it was able to use visuals, audio, and time to tell a story and convey a pretty clear message of breaking conformity as an individual by buying a Mac. The PSP ad, on the other hand, has a message that's up for interpretation, since there's no story directly being told, just the artwork being depicted. They're also different in the impact that both of these had on consumers. To this day, Apple's 1984 ad is highly regarded and remembered as an all-time iconic ad. Sony's PSP ad, on the other hand, wasn't nearly as big and lost relevancy after a few years due to it being outshined by other advertisements put out by Sony. In fact, there's barely any videos that can be found in relation to this ad, and one of the reasons for this may be because the PSP ad was something you had to see in person, and it wasn't in video format that can be watched over and over like Apple's. Lastly, they differ in terms of target audience or the intended viewer. The PSP was an entertainment product targeting mostly teenagers, while Apple was targeting a broader audience of people while also promoting individuality.
Despite the differences, these two specimens also share a lot in common. First off, these ads were all ideas at one point. The creative designers and the ad campaign groups had to have sat down and thought, how will we sell our products with these ads? These makers had to decide on the message, craft, art, and the vision for these ads. Many ideas were probably brought up, but we may never know about them since they were scrapped. They also both decided to use the same theme of rebellion to portray their product. Apple doing it in the way of breaking out of being normal and becoming different, while Sony promoted their product by seemingly going against the laws and vandalizing buildings. These ads use the connection of the people to decide how to create their ads. Both of these ads were also created to raise questions and have the people talk about them. With Apple, many viewers were both puzzled and intrigued since this wasn't the average ad at the time, while Sony was more controversial since there were questions if they took part in vandalism and cultural appropriation or not. This caused the people to question the ad, but this created more spread of the PSP. I think both of these ads used very good marketing plans. Even though the way they tried to bring in customers was very controversial, these two companies were able to sell their product. Sony used the era and trends to fit in and relate to the younger ages, which was a very cool and smart decision, showing that they are not just a company and actually are part of the real world. Apple wanted the consumers to believe they don't need to be like everyone else and choose to portray a message through their ad, telling people how their product can make them stand out. I find the ideas of these ads were executed perfectly. It really makes me think about how I would decide to design and create something to portray what my goal is, thinking of all the parts of VCD and really using specific strategies, using my imagination, my maker mind, and my viewer mind. These ads were creative and unique, and that is why they work.
In my opinion, I think these ads were both successful in their own ways as they utilized various elements of VCD. Objectively, they both reached their goals of making sales considering how popular both products were. But if I had to compare the success of their ads, without a doubt Apple's was way more successful. Just the longevity of their ads influence speaks volumes to how revolutionary it must have been in the advertising industry. In relation to VCD, I think what this ad really does well is connecting the message to the viewer with the use of appeals. And I think a lot of this has to do with the chilling environment and story Ridley Scott was able to create, which makes you want to watch it over and over. I personally think when he came up with the idea for it, he wanted to focus more on the viewer and less on the product, which is something companies just didn't understand at the time. With Sony, I think they also did a good job doing this, but they could have executed it better. One way would be to get an actual, reputable, and authentic graffiti artist to design and do the artworks. This would have then eliminated the question of authenticity and possibly allowed the artwork to be more expressive, which might leave a lasting impression on the viewer.